My name is Beverly Kundell, Senior National Account Executive at National Mortgage Professional Magazine, and I would like to welcome you to National Mortgage Professional Magazine's webinar titled Highly Effective and Compliant Marketing Strategies of Today's Top Originators, sponsored and presented by TagQuest. I would like to thank all of our webinar attendees for taking the time out of their busy days for this very valuable and informative webinar in our ongoing series of webinars. I would especially like to thank today's webinar sponsor and presenter, TagQuest. TagQuest is a full-service marketing firm created specifically for the ever-changing business world. TagQuest assists companies with their direct marketing, advertising, and branding needs and knows what it takes to generate quality customers and, most importantly, how to retain those customers for years to come. TagQuest brings forth a unique opportunity to utilize their experience and expertise in varying consumer sales and marketing environments. Our presenter for today's webinar is Caleby Guillory. Caleby Guillory is president of TagQuest, Inc., a full-service marketing firm dedicated to assisting companies with their direct marketing, advertising, and branding needs. TagQuest, Inc. works with their clients to overcome the many challenges associated with identifying, acquiring, and retaining customers. Mr. Guillory brings over 10 years' experience in sales, marketing, and business organization to the table. Mr. Guillory co-founded the first annual Rogue Valley Summit in Medford, Oregon in 2012, and has published a number of articles on sales and marketing. Before we get started today, I just want to put a poll question out there to see where you are with your current marketing efforts. So I'm going to put that poll question up right now. And the question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you that your marketing is completely compliant? If you could please answer 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and I'll give you a few seconds to answer, and then I will share the results with you. Okay, I'm going to give you like 5 more seconds. Okay, and our poll is now closed. I'm going to share the results with you. So 5% of you said that 1, 9% of you, said 2, 39% of you said 3, 33% of you said 4, and 15% of you said 5. So most of you are somewhere in the mid-range. Hopefully after you finish with this webinar, you'll be able to change that and you'll all be 5s at the end. Okay, so now we're going to move on and get started with our webinar. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to today's webinar presenter, Caleby Guillory.
Thanks, Beverly. Before we get started, I just want to cover really quick the things we'll be going over. First, we'll be going over predatory regulating, who's regulating your market, what exactly it is that's being regulated and why. We'll go over common compliance mistakes. We're going to cover mistakes made all the time, all over the country, even by some of the big banks. Some of these mistakes are made on a daily or weekly basis. We're going to cover how you can stay current, where you can go to get up-to-date information so you can check the status of your current campaign and whether or not it's compliant, which sort of goes along with the poll question that was asked. We'll go over some campaign truths, uncovering the myths of mortgage marketing, some of the compliance of specific campaigns, specific products, and the best use of each type of marketing while staying compliant. Key factors to consider. These are factors you're going to want to consider before you spend money on marketing and before your campaign takes off. And then we'll go over how to stay ahead of the competition, even if those competitors of yours may or may not choose to follow the compliance rules themselves. At the end, we have a bonus. There's a new product that I'll go into depth about that's sweeping the nation for mortgage and why it is the most compliant campaign that's ever been out. So to start out with, who is governing the mortgage industry? Right now, the 2 big names in the business are the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There's plenty others out there governing the mortgage industry, but we're going to focus on these 2 because these are the 2 that really take care of how mortgage people market, not so much how you write loans or anything else. So first, the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC is responsible for developing and updating the FCRA, which is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which, as you all understand, dictates how you can and cannot use consumers' credit reports to determine their credit worthiness before you offer a loan. But what it also dictates is how you can and cannot use pre-screened credit data for the purposes of marketing. What is pre-screened credit data? If any of you are unfamiliar with, pre-screened credit data comes from the three major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. It's the data we use for marketing, for telemarketing, for direct mail, and it is a soft hit on the consumer's credit report. So if you're ever using pre-screened credit data, just know that if that consumer goes straight to the bureau and requests a copy of their credit report, it will show that your company has pulled a soft inquiry on that customer. Each and every company that uses credit data must be set up so there's a paper trail of who's using the information. Of course, this is people's personal credit that we're talking about, so it's not something that's taken very lightly across the nation. The most important things to keep in mind when using pre-screened credit data from these bureaus is that you absolutely have to follow the Federal Trade Commission's FCRA guidelines. You can find the guidelines at www.ftc.gov. And on their main page there, up at the top right, you'll see a search bar. If you type in that search bar FCRA, it will come up with the FCRA guidelines so you can stay in compliance that way. So here's the rules. In order for a company to use pre-screened credit data, that company must be able to offer credit to a consumer. What that also means is that any company that cannot extend credit to a consumer is not allowed to use pre-screened credit data at all. Any company using pre-screened credit data for the purposes of marketing must have a firm offer of credit within that set market. So if you're sending out a direct mail campaign to attract new business and you're using credit data, every mail piece has to have the firm offer on it, which means it has to say something to the effect of, you've been pre-qualified for a loan in such and such amount. You're also going to have the required disclaimers. On here we have the short form. What you're looking at right now is the short form that has to be on the front of the letter. So you can see how it reads. It must appear on the front of the mailer. It has to have a minimum font of 12 points. It has to be bolded or italicized, and it must remain inside this box that you see here on the screen. The long form and opt-out you can put somewhere else after you determine where it's going to go. On the long form, they're not very specific about where it goes. Here's some detailed information on the long form opt-out. It may appear elsewhere on the mailer, on the other side, on the separate sheet. If any of you are familiar with doing direct mail, in some cases when you use credit data, you'll have the pre-screen, the short form opt-out notice on the front, and then you'll print the long form on the back. Other people will use a completely separate insert to put the long form opt-out on. They don't really care where it's at. It just has to be a part of the piece of mail. And the front short form has to make reference to where that long form is located. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. These guys are the new watchdog in the industry. I'm sure you all have heard of them. Do not take them lightly. Their sole purpose is to protect consumers from predatory lending and marketing that leads to predatory lending. Not only are they overseeing the marketing that you do, they're also overseeing the loans that you write, the industry relationships that you have that may involve RESPA, and they even regulate the amount of money you can make, which you're all familiar with. They're changing laws almost as fast as you're closing loans, and they're not really following the typical standards for implementing any of their guidelines. For example, when the FTC normally comes out with a new regulation, they will tell you that you have a certain amount of time before you have to be in compliance. The CFPB has recently published statements stating that they are not going to follow the same standards and expect their regulations to be implemented immediately. Kind of a big deal when you're talking about the whole mortgage industry. The CFPB is writing laws that supersede previously written FCC guidelines, so in a sense they're above the FCC in that regard, and they're making it their mission to oversee the entire mortgage industry, which affects everybody on the call here today. So now you might be asking yourself, well, how the heck do I know if my marketing is going to be compliant? And I can tell you have a couple of different options. one, and probably the easiest one, is to work with your compliance department if you have one in your company. Send them copies of any scripts, any letters that you want to use. Ask them about data files you're thinking about buying or renting or leasing or getting from title. Let them look it over and make any changes that they recommend. If you're working with a marketing company, find out if they'll work directly with your compliance department. Here at TagQuest, we work directly with compliance departments. Not only does that allow you to not have to worry about it, but it also gives us the benefit of making sure they don't butcher your marketing campaign. Because we're versed in the rules, we can assist in keeping the marketing campaign compliant and still generating good results. Another option for you is to get with a marketing company that you're using and ask if the materials even need approval. If you're using public data or data from title, they don't have very many restrictions, so depending on the campaign that you're using, you may or may not need to worry about compliance very much. If you're ever in doubt, just make sure you ask about it. Ask your boss, ask your manager, ask your broker, ask your marketing firm. Just ask about it. A lot of people try and brush it under the table, and it's really something that just needs to be talked about because some campaigns have more compliance rules than others, and we're going to get into some of the different campaigns here in just a few minutes. I get a lot of people that we talk to all the time that think that ignorance is sort of bliss when it comes to compliance, and I can tell you guys, ignorance does not hold up in court. If you can think you can squeeze through letting ignorance be a scapegoat, you're going to find yourself in some trouble. Ask your compliance department before you go through with anything, or just ask anybody. Some of these fines can be as high as $5,000 per infraction. So that means every mail piece that you sent out, or every phone call that you made, or every lead that you received, whatever your marketing campaign is, it's $5,000 per infraction. So it can be costly. Again, the takeaway from all this is just ask. Make sure you're asking about it. And if you ever find somebody who's trying to blow it off, you ask somebody. You ask your marketing company. You ask your compliance officer, and they say, oh, it's no big deal. It's nothing to worry about. I would really recommend that you ask somebody else because they may or may not understand how serious the topic is. So let's get into some specific types of marketing. I'm going to start off with one of the toughest ones, which, believe it or not, is actually internet leads. Internet leads can be a serious risk because we don't ever truly know where the customer went to get excited enough to give us their contact information. I don't know if any of you know a company called LendingTree, or if you knew that they had a mortgage license, but they actually do, and they have to because in the past they've used interest rates on some of their banner ads. And as we all know now, if you're going to talk about interest rates to a customer, you have to be a licensed mortgage broker. So internet lead companies offer all kinds of giveaways and different promotions to get people to submit their information. Now, some of them don't, and those ones provide a quality lead, but they charge an arm and a leg for them too. So if you're getting a cheap lead, don't quite know where that is at as far as compliance goes. If you're spending a lot of money for your internet leads, there's a chance that they're a higher quality and probably more compliant. The biggest problem with internet leads is what's called co-registration. And this is when a customer goes to submit their information. Let's say a customer goes to my website and they submit their information to me. And right before they hit the submit button, I'm going to ask them a couple of questions. I'd ask them if they're interested in a refinance, in a purchase, if they're interested in buying a new car or a boat or a dog. Now I've got a lead for myself, and I've got a lead that I can sell 3 to 5 times to somebody else. So now I can actually make money on leads that I'm producing for myself. Now, we don't do this here at TagQuest. This is just a hypothetical scenario. So who do you buy from? You have to be careful who you buy internet leads from and make sure you're working with a reputable company. Don't just jump on the cheapest one that you can find. Some of the internet lead companies have been around for a long time, and some of them are brand new into the business. Some of the best uses for internet leads is for people that aren't really working in the office, or they're only working in the office part-time. If you're someone who doesn't have a lot of sales experience, isn't really comfortable, say, making cold calls or dialing through a list or some of the more salesman aspects, internet leads work well for those people. I mean, an internet lead is somebody who's gone online and requested information. The tough part about internet leads is you don't know how many times they're sold, typically. You can find them exclusively sold, but more times than not, they're sold to multiple people, so you're competing for the business. So if you don't like competing for the business, you may want to shy away from internet leads. One of the other benefits of using internet leads is you can get started for a very low cost. Just don't expect the world from them because some of their close ratios can be a little iffy. One last thing to watch out for as far as internet leads go is in all of my time doing this, I've never seen a banner ad, I've never seen an ad for an internet lead or any of the websites that they go to, which is tough. So there's no real regulating because there's millions and millions of websites out there. You don't really know where the customer went, and as far as compliance goes, for you, the mortgage professional, you need to know where that customer's been and what information has been put in front of them to make sure that you're compliant, and because you're the end user, it's ultimately up to you to make sure that all those rules are followed. Best uses, people trust the internet. They're more willing to give us their contact information now, even if they're not quite ready to move yet. So in the olden days, internet leads, people were a little more afraid of the internet, so they wouldn't put in their information until they were absolutely ready to do something. And those days have definitely changed. So now people are more confident on the internet, so they're willing to put in their information maybe a little earlier. So the quality of the internet lead, as it used to be, has gone down in those regards. Now we're going to talk about live transfers. With as much as 90% of the population on the do not call list, they aren't as productive as they used to be. But I thought, since live transfer is still a buzzword in the mortgage industry, I thought we should touch on it. There's a couple of different aspects you want to keep in mind when you're talking about live transfers. First, you have the call center. Where's the call center located? Are you using a call center that's located in the U.S.? If you're not using a call center located in the U.S. because they're less expensive, do they understand the guidelines that you have to follow? Do they know what they can and can't say on the phone? And on top of that, if you're working with somebody outside of the U.S., sometimes there's a language barrier, so you want to be careful that they understand what it is that you're doing and the rules you have to follow. American call centers are always easier to deal with, but they're also more expensive, which is why people use them overseas. So on top of the call center location, concerning live transfers, you also need to worry about your data. Where's the data coming from? Are you providing the data, or is the call center providing the data? If the call center is providing the data, do you know where it's coming from? And do you understand what the rules are that you may or may not have to follow? If so, you'll need to make sure you've got a compliance script. And if not, you want to find out what questions they're using to qualify without letting the call center talk about specifics. Because again, if you're not a licensed, you don't have an MLS number, you can't talk about specifics with the consumer. And on scripting, remember that the call center is never going to license their people, so they're not going to be able to get super, super specific. In the olden days, they used to be able to ask all kinds of questions about interest rates and almost warm the customer up. Heck, they could even get a 1003 form filled out for you, but they can't do that anymore. The guidelines have changed, the regulations have changed, and so the live transfers aren't working as well as they used to. Buying tips. Unless you're using a familiar call center, one that you've used before or has been highly recommended to you from somebody that you know, I would recommend staying within the U.S. It's more expensive, and you probably have to plan on spending a little bit of money. They're not cheap, but they do work. Startup costs for that type of campaign are normally around $5,000 or more. And most importantly, do not buy it from anybody who's offering a per-call cost on live transfers. Live transfers, as far as telemarketing go, if somebody's offering to give you a live transfer and it's a per call, that means they're guaranteeing you the transfer rate. And if they're, for some reason, aren't getting the transfers to come over, they're going to start transferring over people that are less qualified. And as a mortgage professional, you need people that are qualified and interested. So it sort of defeats the purpose. The best use for live transfers is for bigger companies with larger budgets, have at least 10 people or more who can take the calls, and they're writing multiple loan types, which would also mean they're licensed in multiple states. If you're trying to go after one state with live transfers, it's just more, you need too much data to have to go after telemarketing because, like I said, as much as 90% of the population in some data files is on the do not call list. So you want to make sure that you're licensed in multiple states and you have a wide variety of loans to write if you're going to use live transfers. Direct mail. Everybody knows direct mail. Direct mail can be difficult sometimes from compliance because there's so many different pieces of the campaign that have to go into it. And every single piece of the direct mail campaign has its own different compliance issues. So all the aspects of the campaign are, you have the mail piece, the data, the call tracking, any leads tracking that you're doing. If you're using a call center, you have to work with the call center compliance also. We'll start off with the mail piece. So if you're using pre-screen credit data, like we said in the beginning, you have to make a firm offer. And that means you have to have the small opt-out on the front and the large opt-out on the back. If you do that, in a lot of cases, it's going to lower your response rate. So you want to be careful that you test and measure to find out what's going to work there. If you use an interest rate on your mail piece, you have to explain what qualifications are necessary to qualify for that interest rate. If you use payments that are quoted on a mail piece, that works really well to get people. You're going to go from this payment down to this payment if you call me today. But you have to have the terms in the disclaimer stating what qualifications are required for their eligibility. And you can at any point with direct mail impersonate any other lender. Even if it's on accident, you can end up in trouble. There's a fine line here between using a lender name on a mail piece for building credibility and impersonating that lender. Now, in some states, you can't even use the lender name at all on a mail piece. So you want to check with the states that you're licensed in and find out what the rules are. Again, you can go to the FTC.gov website and they have all of the guidelines listed there because some states won't let you use it at all. Other states will let you use the lender name. Using the lender name builds credibility. It's not about trying to impersonate that you're with somebody else that you're not. But if you're sending out a direct mail campaign, if you know that that customer is already with this lender, you now know more about them, so you now have more credibility. So in a lot of cases, it'll help up your response rate. But you want to make sure that if you're using the lender name, it's compliant in your area so you don't wind up in any trouble. With direct mail, you also have data, which we've talked about. If you're using pre-screen data, you're going to have to follow those guidelines. We use a mortgage file. It's a mortgage-specific file. It's not credit data. It does have credit attributes, but it's a little bit different. What that does is allow people to not have to use the pre-screen firm offer language, which sometimes hurts the response rate, but still allows you to target people who qualify for the loans that you write. So whether you're trying to go after HARP or FHA or VA or one of those things, you can target those specific people and not have to worry about the firm offer and pre-screen guidelines. The phone calls. When the phone calls come in, a lot of companies like to monitor those inbound phone calls for tracking, for training purposes, verify the response rate of the mail, but you have to be careful here. Who has access to those phone calls? Some of those phone calls, if they're recorded, you're going to have customers' personal information on them. They have Social Security numbers, personal income, all this stuff is personal to the consumer, and you can't just let anybody have access to that stuff. So when you guys are doing these, like a direct mail, it's a little more intricate with a lot of different areas in it. Make sure you understand who's got access to that information. If you're using a call center to screen the inbound calls, you have to know what's being said to those people. You have to talk about the scripting that they're using and what's going on, what questions are being asked. Again, if they're not licensed, they can't be talking about any kind of specifics with these people. I don't know how many people are familiar with a CRM. It's a customer relationship manager. If your mail comes in, comes with a third-party CRM, or if you're using your own CRM, do you know what kind of information is being populated in the back end of that? Some of the CRMs allow data to be uploaded into them, and in some cases, if you're not careful, you can have personal consumer information like their credit score, which is highly regulated by the CFPB and the FTC. They'll be stored in your CRM, and you may or may not even know about it. So you want to make sure that you're asking about that kind of stuff before you get into these marketing campaigns. Buying tips on direct mail. Make sure you work with a company that tests mail all over the country. This will allow you to benefit from the knowledge of what's working for a specific type of loans that you're going after. And ask about the separate facets of the campaign like we just spoke about. Ask about the compliance issues for each one. Most people don't ask about it. Again, I'm going to go back to the ignorance thing. But you can end up in a lot of trouble by not following the rules. So you're better off asking ahead of time. Best uses for direct mail. Direct mail works pretty well for just about everybody. It's a little bit pricey. You're probably not going to be able to get into it for a little less than $2,500, but you can target different loan types. You can do FHA or VA or conventional, reverse, commercial. I mean, you name it, you can do it with direct mail. It works for people that aren't the best at sales because you have people, the consumers are already get your message. They're already kind of interested, and they're calling into you. Direct mail does not work if you can't be in the office Monday through Friday because you can't dictate when those calls are going to come in. You can't tell people when to call you. So if you're working part-time, don't consider direct mail. It also works very well if you don't want to compete with other people. So a lot of people ask about leads and how exclusive they are. If you're doing a direct mail campaign, they're always 100% exclusive, which also works well for compliance issues because if you're doing your own direct mail campaign, you pick the data, so you know what criteria you're going after, you know where it's coming from. You pick the mail piece, you can run the mail piece through your compliance department so you understand that that's fully compliant. You can record the phone calls if you want to and not allow access for anybody else to have them, so you can monitor your people. You can use it for training purposes, but you can make sure that you're still compliant. And it'll produce an exclusive lead for you. Now we're going to get into probably the most controversial lead ever made on the planet in the mortgage industry, trigger leads. I'm sure most of you have heard about them. Because they're so controversial, I'm going to try and make this quick. But whether you like them or not, or whatever side of the trigger lead scenario you're on, they are a force in the industry, so I thought it'd be worth mentioning. First off, what is a trigger lead? Trigger leads happen when people have their credit pulled for a refinance or a purchase. Once the credit is pulled, the information is flagged at the credit bureau. And since we're talking about a tri-merge for the mortgage industry, you guys pull all three bureaus. All three credit bureaus have this trigger lead available to them. The next day, 24 hours later, the bureau sells the information to other people in the market so that they can try and give the customer an offer. Some people call to them, some people mail to them. Now, the information is coming from the credit bureau, so it's important that you understand you still have to follow the exact same guidelines you do with credit data. You still have to get set up with the bureau. You still have to file all the paperwork. When you got set up, most mortgage people that get set up had to go through a process in order to pull credit on a consumer. When you're using credit data for the purposes of marketing, which also includes the trigger lead, you have to go through almost the exact same process. You're going to have to fill out the paperwork. They're going to have to do a site inspection. They need to know that you're a legitimate company. Again, we're talking about people's personal credit information. This is not something that's taken lightly by anybody. I think that the trigger leads are probably the #1 misused, non-compliant area of the mortgage industry right now because I don't think most people understand that they come from the credit bureau. And because they're so cheap, there's a lot of people that are misusing them or reselling them or one thing or another. So make sure that if you're going to use them, you get set up and that you go through the proper channels. People call on and mail to these leads all over the country all day, every day. A big part of that marketing that's done is out of compliance, like I was talking about, because the opt-outs that they put on the mail piece aren't used. The firm offers and the scripting, those opt-outs that we showed you earlier also have to go on any telemarketing script that's used if you're using credit data or a trigger lead. A lot of people aren't using that out there right now, and those people are winding up in a lot of trouble. It's important that you fully understand the compliance that goes along with this type of lead. Remember, it's federally protected information, and ignorance is not going to hold up in court. So you have to fill out the sign-up paperwork, just like when you signed up for Credco or whoever it was before. If you use trigger leads or credit data, make sure you understand the rules. Make sure the company you're buying them from knows the rules. And again, if you're going to go into this area, make sure you ask about compliance and the person you're talking to. If they understand what's going on, they'll walk you through the process. It takes a couple of weeks to get set up, but once you're set up, you never have to go through the process again. So it's really easy once that's done. If for any reason you talk to somebody who brushes over it or says they don't worry about it or it's not a big deal, I would highly recommend talking to somebody else. As far as buying tips go for trigger leads, make absolutely certain the company you're buying them from understands the compliance aspect of the lead as well as yourself, because people have a tendency to skip over compliance. Trigger leads come in a 1 to 7 days old and weekly 8 to 30 days old segments. You cannot use trigger leads after 30 days. That holds true with credit data also, which we'll get into. in just a couple of minutes. The best use for trigger leads, if you choose to use them, is if you like competition. If you're a person who likes to compete for business, a trigger lead is a great way to go. You will be competing for the business because they've already had their credit pulled with somebody else. Trigger leads are inexpensive, so you can get started for just a few $100s and work with smaller budgets. They work well for telemarketing and direct mail. They don't work if you have a moral issue with the lead itself and where it comes from. They also probably won't work if you've never done any phone sales before, because it still is a cold call. They're not expecting your phone call, and you will be competing with somebody for that. Some of the other best uses that we found is a product called Mortgage Insights. This is when you take your past customers and you upload them into a credit bureau. So Equifax, Experian, or TransUnion. Upload your customer list in there, and then you monitor those customers. So anytime one of your past customers has their credit pulled for a mortgage, you can get notified that they're out there shopping. Because you're working directly with the credit bureau, it's completely compliant, and it's the easiest, cheapest way for you to stay on top of your past customers. A lot of people spend a lot of money on postcards and mailings and birthday cards and all this other stuff, and it works. Don't get me wrong, it's expensive. If you use a trigger lead for that Mortgage Insights, you'll only get notified when they're in the market and having their credit pulled. Now we're going to move on to data lists. The biggest misconception about data lists is how long they're available for them to be used. Some people get data lists from title, some people buy them, some people share them, some people steal them. 99.999% of all data sold in the U.S. is actually not sold at all. It's actually leased or rented, and you have that availability for 30 days. That includes all credit bureau pre-screen data that we talked about. It includes all the data you get from title, which is probably public record. It even includes aged or modeled data that's truly only rented and not even for sale. Now, people tell you that you're buying data from them, but that purchase is purchasing a lease on the data for the next 30 days. I talk to people all the time. They've been saving data up for years, building a mountain they're planning on marketing to one day. The bad news is that old data is not going to make it through the post office because the post office CAT certifies every record before it goes out. So if you have 20,000 data records that you've been sitting on for 5 years, chances are you're not going to get a very good delivery rate once it goes through CAT certification. And then as far as the phone numbers go on data, the DNC is updated every month. So if you're not following the do not call list guidelines, then you can end up being in a lot of trouble. And if you're calling people who are on the do not call list, you can end up in a lot of trouble with that also. You can go online to do-not-call.gov to find out information about how to register with the DNC. If you're making any phone calls outbound whatsoever on data to people that you don't have a prior relationship with, it's mandatory that you sign up on that website. You can get 5 area codes free of charge. After that, they charge you. I think the entire country, I think if you want the whole country right now, it's going for about $15,000 a year. But if you're telemarketing and they find out that you are without having a DNC registry, it's called a subscription account number. If you don't have a subscription account number and you get caught telemarketing, you're going to end up in trouble. The way that they police this is they seed the data files. What that means is they put bogus records into the data files, so whatever marketing is being done to it, be it direct mail, telemarketing, or whatever gets done to it gets monitored. So if you're sending out mail, if you're making phone calls, you're going to end up making phone calls and sending mail to the company that's monitoring the data. So when you're sending out that non-compliant mail piece or you're using that out-of-country call center, you're still going to be on the hook. And now with the CFPB, they're cracking down on the marketing that you're doing, not just whether or not it's compliant with FTC guidelines, but whether or not it's predatory marketing that leads to predatory lending in the business. There's still mortgage companies out there being shut down because they can't afford to pay the fines from the marketing they've done. And there's still marketing companies out there that are going out of business or being shut down for the same reason. The companies that have been through this mortgage meltdown over the last few years and the ones that are still standing are the ones you can pretty much trust or probably know what they're talking about. If you're ever on the phone with somebody at a marketing company or in your company and you're talking to them about compliance and they don't really seem to understand what's going on, get on the phone with somebody that's higher up. above them. Get on the phone with the manager or their boss so that you can get some answers on the compliance. As far as 2013 goes, there's been a big shakeup with credit bureau data. Don't let yourself get in trouble by not complying with this. There's still people out there selling credit data that aren't following the rules. So here's the thing to remember. Just because you can get your hands on the data doesn't mean that it's legitimate. If you're getting credit data and you're screening it by a customer's credit score, you've got to get set up with the bureau. Now, there's other files out there. Like I said, we use a mortgage file. Our mortgage file isn't credit data. It's not coming from the credit bureau. It has what's called a credit rating, and it will save you all of the trouble of having to comply with all of these rules. The data file is created specifically for the mortgage industry, tested, proven, it works. And there's no fees that will arise from you not being in compliance with your mail. Especially since the CFPB came out. It's not an organization that you're probably going to want to go into battle with. There's plenty of compliant ways to grow your business. You just have to know what the rules are so you can figure out what is an acceptable way to grow your business. Using a mortgage file, using public record, or if you use pre-screen data, just make sure you're following the rules that are out there about it. Buying tips on data lists. More so than with any other type of marketing, make sure you're using a reputable company. Data is probably the #1 misused thing out there. And that goes along with trigger leads because it's the type of data. People buy it, people resell it, people who resell it to other resellers, and it just gets out there to all of these people. And when we end up talking to customers, excuse me, they have no idea about any of the compliance. They've never signed up any compliance paperwork whatsoever. You're the mortgage professional, which means you're the end user, which means you're the one who's ultimately on the hook, not the company that you're buying it for. And again, ignorance doesn't hold up in court. A couple of things to keep in mind is that data is never sold exclusively. So no matter what it is you're buying data for any marketing that you're doing, know there's a chance that somebody else out there could be targeting the same demographic. And in that case, they're going to get the same data, which in that case, the consumer is going to get both of your mail pieces or both of your phone calls or both of your marketing pieces. Data is the most important component of any marketing campaign that you do. So make sure that you're in compliance. Some of its best uses, direct mail, telemarketing, cold calling. I've even seen people buy data and use it for door knocking. Data is cheap. It's readily accessible. It allows you to target the exact person you're looking for. So whatever loan type you're going after, age group, geography, you name it, data is the way that you're going to find those people. I personally believe that anybody can add data to their marketing, or they can change the data that they're currently using and immediately improve their marketing results. Email marketing. Hands down, email marketing is the cheapest form of marketing you will ever do. The flip side of that is it may or may not make a whole lot of money the first time out of the gate. You're going to have to test and measure and test and measure and test and measure. But because email marketing is so cheap, you're actually you're able to do that at a reasonable cost. Canned spam regulations can be found at www.business.ftc.gov. You will find the Canned Spam Act and all of the regulations that you need to follow. A couple of things to keep in mind. Don't use false or misleading header information in your from line or your to or your reply to line. You cannot use deceptive subject lines either. The subject line must accurately reflect the content of the message. If you're sending out an email to prospective clients about doing a refinance, you have to have something about that in the subject line. You can't say free shoes and then send out an email about a refinance on a mortgage. You have to somewhere identify the message as an ad. Now, the law gives you a lot of leeway here on how to do this, but at some point you have to disclose clearly that this is an ad. On your email body, you have to tell recipients of the email where you're located. You have to have a name and an address so they can contact you. You have to have an opt-out on all of your emails. Your message has to include clear and conspicuous explanation of how a recipient can and cannot and can opt out of getting emails from you in the future. You have to honor your opt-out request promptly. The rule says you have 30 days from once you sent your message and they requested an opt-out to get their name off of your list. So if you're sending out email marketing, make sure that you have an opt-out at the bottom of it. There's plenty of ways to go out there and email market to different groups of people. There's all different companies online that you can use for email marketing that will automatically include all of this stuff. So you'll upload your email content into their email system. It'll automatically put on all the information that you need so that you can be completely compliant. If you have anybody who's doing email marketing for you, if you use a third-party company, make sure that you're monitoring what they're doing and what's going out on your behalf. Just like a direct mail campaign, you should be signing off on a proof before any mail piece ever goes to print. On an email campaign, you should be signing off on a proof before any email ever gets sent out on your behalf. Forwarding domains for email safety. A lot of people don't know about this. So if you send out 50 million emails tomorrow, there's a chance that your domain, because they're going to click on it for spam, your domain might get blacklisted and you might not be able to email even inter-officely. So when you're sending out an email for marketing purposes, it's a really good idea to go buy. GoDaddy costs 10, 12 bucks for a domain. You can buy a domain. You can use that domain to forward back to your landing page. And with that domain comes a free email, which you can forward to your own email, in which case you're not using your own domain, so your own domain won't get blacklisted. The difficulties with email marketing is the low response rate. So whereas when you're talking about a direct mail campaign, direct mail response, I think the national average for direct mail right now is 1/4 to 0.5%. In the mortgage world, we're usually pretty good at keeping it at 1% or above. With email marketing, you're at a fraction of a fraction. 1/10 of 1% is a good performing email marketing campaign. So that means you have to send out 100,000 emails to get 100 people to respond to it. And just because you get 100 responses doesn't mean you're going to get 100 forms filled on your landing page. There's people that are going to go on there and inquire about it. The good thing with email is that it's so cheap, you can test and measure and test and measure and really hone a good message in over time without spending a ton of money. You could probably send out 5, 10, 12 email campaigns, big email campaigns, for the same cost of doing one direct mail campaign. So you have the availability of honing in that message and making it work. Buying tips. Watch out for people overselling email marketing. It has low response rates. You're not going to get rich on your first email marketing campaign. It takes time to develop it. Anybody who says they have the end-all, be-all, and you're going to be a millionaire if you drop one email doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're just trying to get your money. It takes time to develop a campaign that's going to work. Again, the benefit is they're really cheap. Emails sell for a penny a piece or something. I mean, they're really cheap to get sent out, so you have the availability in your budget to test them and measure and test again. Best use for email marketing. For the mortgage business, email marketing doesn't typically work for prospective clients. And I'll tell you, it's just because consumers get a lot more spam than businesses do. So in the mortgage business, what we found is using email marketing for recruiting is the best use. You can find people who are already licensed and ready to get started with something right away. That's the best use we found for it in the mortgage business. Okay, right before we get into Q&A, I've got a bonus, which was the newest, latest, and greatest marketing campaign sweeping the nation. What a lot of people are doing out there is a direct mail. Everybody knows direct mail works, right? I didn't say it was the cheapest. I said it was the best. If you take a direct mail campaign, you can get the piece approved through your compliance department, so it's completely compliant. You can use pre-screen data, or you can use a mortgage file, so your data is completely compliant, right? So you don't have to worry about anything. You can target any kind of loan type you want, or any type of refinance, or whatever you want, and it's all completely exclusive. Now here's the kicker to the direct mail. Have a call center take the inbound phone calls so that when the calls come in, you're not having to deal with people who aren't interested or want to be taken off the list. The call center will take care of all those for you. Back in the early 2000s, late 90s, live transfers were a hit. Those were the way to grow your business. They're expensive, but they worked really, really well. Now, because of the DNC, there's not as many phone numbers to call, so direct mail is really the only way to hit those people. And because response rates are up, you can still have the call center verify that they're interested. You can use data to verify that they're qualified compliantly, and you can use a piece that goes through your compliance department. Heck, in a lot of cases, we work with the compliance department directly to make sure the piece is totally compliant. And then you add the CRM, upload the data in there. You can build credibility with your customer, get them on the phone, and then you guys can do your job and close the refi and close the purchase business. That's all I've got. And I turn this back over to you.
Okay, so we would again like to thank Caleb for his informative presentation. Please remember, if you have any questions, you can submit them on the webinar screen under the question box. We don't have that much time left, so if your question is not answered during the webinar, someone from the TagQuest team will be in touch with you within the next few days to answer your questions. So if there's anything that we don't get to, or even if you think of something after the webinar, we have Caleb's contact information up on the screen for you. So you can always contact him, and someone from TagQuest will be in touch with you. Okay, we're going to go to some questions now. I have a whole bunch coming in, so I know we're not going to get to all of them. Let's start off. Alex from San Diego, he asked, I've been buying trigger leads from the same company for years, and I never signed any paperwork. What should I do?
Alex, tough spot to be in. I'm not sure of the complete scenario. I would ask them about the compliance. If you've been buying them for years and you've never signed any paperwork, I wouldn't be surprised if you weren't able to get them for very much longer, only being that CFPB is really cracking down. Most of the rules that they're implementing were taking place starting January 1st, 2013, and the ramifications have already been started happening since then. The first thing I would say is ask them. Maybe they have paperwork you can sign up, and that would be fantastic. If they tell you that you don't need to sign up for trigger leads at all, I would steer clear of them and maybe try and find a new provider. If for some reason that doesn't work, you can always call me. I don't mind answering any questions about compliance, even if you're working with somebody else. Not a big deal.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Stacy from Las Vegas. Every time I get a mail piece approved by our compliance department, it doesn't perform. Is there a way to be compliant and keep a good response?
Yes, of course there is. There was a time when being compliant was synonymous with unsuccessful, and those days are past. Here's the trick. Getting the marketing company to work directly with your compliance department. So and I'm speaking hypothetically here, if you were working with TagQuest, we have our own compliance team who's going to work with your compliance department because we understand compliance and they understand compliance. I understand how to make a mail piece perform. They understand what needs or doesn't need to be said on the mail piece. So by working with them directly, we're able to go through all the different things that need to be on the mail piece while keeping it compliant. So if you're working with a company that if you're working with a marketing company, see if you can get them directly in contact with your compliance department. Otherwise, the alternative is just test and measure. And I know that sometimes if you're, especially with direct mail, because you're doing postage, it's expensive. But the way to get it done is test and measure and test and measure. So you can split test mail pieces and find the one that has the best response rate, and then take a couple of different renditions of it, test it, find out which one responds the best. And after a season, you'll be able to find out what's actually working. If you track every single facet of the campaign, the response rate, the calls that come in, time of the week that everything's performing, you'll be able to generate your own campaign that's completely compliant, and it will produce for you. And once it's producing, you'll be able to live off of that forever. You just have to make minor changes based on which type of loan or different type of criteria you're going to need.
Okay, our next question is kind of general, but I think it's an important one. It's from Mike from Miami, Florida. As long as I'm using my compliance department, I can't get in trouble, right?
Mike, I'm so glad that you asked that question. This is probably the #1 misconception in the mortgage business. We work with companies all over the country every day, and the compliance team is there to make sure that you're safe, and I understand that. But if you're in between the marketing company that's actually putting on the piece or putting on the campaign and your compliance team, there's no, it gets lost in translation, for lack of a better term. If your compliance department doesn't know what kind of data you're using, they just know the mail piece that you're sending out. In a lot of cases, I get pieces sent over to us who have pre-screen credit opt-outs on them, and we're not using pre-screen credit data. So there's no need for them to have that. Again, if you can get your marketing company in contact with your compliance department, that's the safest way for you to go. But no, if your compliance department doesn't understand the entire facet of the entire campaign, then there's no way for them to let you know whether or not you're in compliance. And because there's always that give and take between being compliant and having a successful campaign, I understand that you're just wanting to get it through them so you can get it out. But in a lot of cases, if you work with them intimately, you'll be able to find a piece that not only is compliant, but also performs well.
Okay, great. Next question is from Jason from Seattle, Washington. He said, doesn't the marketing company have some responsibility in keeping our campaigns compliant?
I would have to answer that, Jason, yes, if they plan on staying in business. The bottom line on the answer is no. You guys, most people in the mortgage business know in the early 2000s, marketing companies were popping up left and right. All those companies are out of business now because they don't have anything. The end user is the one who's ultimately responsible, and because the mortgage professional is the one who's offering the loan and working with the customer, that's where the end-all, be-all compliance has to take place. But yes, if you work with any type of a reputable company at all, they will let you know where to go, and they will work with you completely on compliance with the campaign.
Okay. Our next question comes from James from Brooklyn, New York. Why does email marketing work for recruiting and not for prospecting new business?
Okay. James, there's a couple of reasons. The biggest reason why it doesn't work so well for prospecting new business is because of spam filtering. Think about it. Google, Yahoo, Bing, MSN, all these huge email providers, think about how phenomenal their spam filtering is as compared to your company, right? And let's even take a big company. Let's say Wells Fargo, right? But if you compare Wells Fargo to Google, I'm fairly certain that Google is going to have a better spam filtering than Wells Fargo does. So when you're using it for recruiting, you're targeting people at work. So you're going through a work spam. So just that alone is going to get your message in there. There's a couple of things that an email and direct mail alike have to happen. They have to get open, they have to get read, and they have to get responded to. If you can't get it delivered, you're not going to be able to get it read. So once they get it read, here's the other reason why it works for recruiting. You're reaching people at work, right? So if you're going to go recruit a mortgage professional from one company to your company, if you reach a person who's not happy at their job, people at their job get paid to read their emails. That's what, it's part of their job. So chances are, especially if they're unhappy, they're going to try and waste as much time as they can reading through their emails. And if you're offering them a better position, they're going to read all the way through it. So now because you got them at work, it got through, it got delivered, and now you caught them at the right time, so it's getting read. And then as long as your message is good, they'll read it and they'll get responded to.
Okay, all right, we have one more question, and then we're going to have to end the webinar. But like I said before, if you have any questions that haven't been answered, we did receive them, and a member of the TagQuest team will get back to you. And if you continue to have questions after the webinar, if you're thinking about something and an hour from now it pops up in your head and you don't know what to do, you can email Caleb, you can call, visit their website. All the information is on your screen right now. Okay, our last question, it comes from Laura from Dallas, Texas. She said, you made mention of a mortgage data file. Where does that come from, and how do you know it's accurate?
Mortgage file. Mortgage file is a proprietary blend of data files that gets updated monthly. And I say proprietary because it's a very tricky business getting data updated on a regular basis. Credit data gets updated every 30 days. Public data gets updated every 60 days. This file has been tested and tested and tested and proven over and over and over for more than 2 years now. This is the most comprehensive data file we've ever used, I've ever seen, with the exception of credit data. So where it comes from is a blend of other data files to get the information that's accurate. The reason why it's accurate is because it's updated every 30 days, and the reason why we know that it's accurate is because we test it every day. Every single day we're using this data file, and it works fantastically well. And the proof is in the pudding. Most of our customers are switching over to using that file so that they don't have to follow the pre-screen credit data guidelines and the FCRA guidelines, and which also helps increase their response rates.
Okay, well, I wanted to thank Caleb again and TagQuest for sponsoring and presenting this webinar. And I'd like to thank all of the attendees for taking time out of your day to attend this webinar. I hope it's been informative for you. Again, if you have questions post-webinar, Caleb's information is on the screen. We will be sending out a recording of the webinar to everyone who attended. And if you know anyone who is registered for the webinar and wasn't able to attend, we will also send it to them so they don't miss out, you know, in case an emergency came up and they weren't able to make it. So you will be able to view the webinar again, and I hope, you know, by viewing it again, it'll be even more helpful for you. So with that, thank you, Caleb. Thank you, TagQuest, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.